Hello, this is Angela with Permaculture. Welcome back to Hausfrau Friday. I'm laughing because my kids have been making so much noise in the background. I have had to say that line over and over and over again, but that's life with 4 kids. So Hausfrau Friday is a regular weekly segment where I discuss my more than 20 years experience as a homemaker, raising 4 children, talk about domestic skills, domestic philosophy, and it is a little bit of a departure from my regular weekly videos, which are about permaculture design. But for me, I've been doing permaculture design and homemaking for more than 20 years, right? More than 2 decades of marrying those 2 passions together. And so for me, there's a lot of overlap, and I really enjoy making these videos. And I want to say thank you so much to all of the folks who watch them and give me such helpful feedback and say such kind things. I want to take a few moments today and unpack something here on Hausfrau Friday. I am a homemaker. I am not a tradwife. Some folks come to my permaculture videos and get angry / upset when they find out that I'm not a prepper. I'm not a libertarian. I'm not a right-winger. And recently I've had some similar reactions when folks come to my Hausfrau Friday videos and they find out that I am not that kind of homemaker. So who can be a homemaker? Anybody, and I've talked about this a little bit in the past. You don't need to have children, or your kids can be all grown up, and you can be a homemaker. You don't need to be a woman, whatever gender you are. Homemaking is a vocation for you if you are interested in doing it. You don't need to be married. You can be single and be a homemaker. You can be in a polycule and be a homemaker. You can be ace and live in a household with other adult housemates and be a homemaker. You can be employed and be a homemaker. It's not something that you have to do full-time. And you can be a full-time homemaker and have a little side gig that earns income for your family. To be a homemaker, you need to be a person who wants to give a portion of their labor and caring for their household and the greater community. That last part may be a little bit controversial. I don't personally think that a homemaker's work ends when they walk out their front door. So who's a tradwife? What is tradwifery? I'm not going to do a huge deep dive into tradwife culture because there are a bazillion videos on the internet absolutely unpacking the history of tradwives and their evolution and their rise to prominence in the culture. But suffice it to say, tradwife is a portmanteau of traditional and wife, or traditional and housewife. It's a subculture of social media influencers and housewives who began to kind of come to the forefront about 2017 after the election of a certain individual. And as Katie Couric put it, tradwives are insistent on not just old-fashioned homemaking skills, but on submission to their husbands, never working outside the home, and avoidance of feminism, and in some cases, extreme conservative political views. Yeah. And herein lies the rub for tradwives who may be searching YouTube for homemaking and one of my videos pops up and they stumble upon my channel. A lot of my views are antithetical to that vision of what a housewife is that is put forward by the subculture of tradwives. So what am I if I'm not a tradwife? Why is it that tradwives don't like my content? Obviously everybody is in process. We're all on a journey. I've talked about deconstructing from my religious past and the evolution of my thinking a little bit on this channel. It is amazing how different we are at 44 than at 24, and how grateful I am to have been presented with alternate viewpoints from what I had when I was younger, and had people who are willing to help educate me. And I'm really grateful also that homemaking for me, even 22 years later, as I've evolved as a person, I've been really grateful that homemaking is not something I felt I had to leave by the wayside. In fact, I found it even more appropriate for my life than it was when I was younger. I've been a homemaker, as I said, for 22 years. I unschool my children who are ages almost 12 up to 20. Obviously I don't really unschool my 20-year-old. She's a college student. But I have raised 2 children to adulthood and have 2 others that are coming up. I volunteer in the community. I run a small business. I share the domestic work with other members of my household. I don't believe in submission to my partner. I'm a feminist and I'm definitely not conservative. In fact, the older I get, I find that I swing more and more and more and more left. And it's been really interesting to kind of look back and see how I've morphed as a person into kind of like an anti-capitalist, eat the rich, burn it all down and rebuild it better kind of person. Which is to say, I've never strayed from my values. It's just that I've turned into somebody who better understands systems of power. I've matured as a person and I've been better educated. And I know better how to live and work in a way that accurately reflects my values. A quick mention here, I would encourage folks to check out my older video on Shannon Hayes' book, Radical Homemakers. Her book was just such a breath of fresh air. It's the best book out there on homemaking, in my opinion. And a lot of Shannon's views echo my views. And I find her book something that I turn back to over and over again and is still highly relevant. So for me, tradwives embrace this kind of regressive ideology that harms women and girls. It's often transphobic and homophobic, and it embraces really strict gender roles that just don't work in our family. The performance of femininity in some folks' homemaking works for them. Right? I have a lot of traditionally very feminine things that I enjoy. I love big earrings. I love wearing dresses. I love wearing long skirts and aprons. When the performance of femininity becomes entwined with wifely submission and beliefs that, are a big nope for me, then it becomes a problem. Also, there's been a lot written, and I'll link down below, about how tradwife culture is a pipeline to the alt-right and white supremacy. When you are talking about really strict gender roles, submission, regression to a 1950s kind of culture, and I don't mean just the history-bounding dress up and wear a crinoline and a cocktail apron and have a martini kind of 1950s. I mean all the other things about the 1950s. When you kind of embrace that culture, it's very easy to get radicalized into more extreme ways of thinking and living and looking at the way that we relate to other people. Again, especially when you start out with a nice big sprinkle of homophobia and transphobia on the top from the get-go. Again, lots of people who've unpacked that kind of alt-right pipeline that tradwives can go down. I'm not going to get into all of it here. Jen from Fundy Fridays, which I'm just such a big fan of her stuff. I have been kind of a Duggar snarker for a long time. Maybe this is a topic for another video. 16 years ago when we lived on the Central Oregon coast, the community we were in there was one that was predominantly made up of IBLP, which is what the Duggars are into. And that was my first exposure to that kind of cult and their beliefs. And so I have a lot of thoughts on that I could get into, but due to my interest having lived in a community immersed in that kind of thing, I found Jen from Fundy Fridays. She mentioned in a video a while back about some Fundy Instagrammer whose name I can't remember. I'll drop the link down below. About how tradwives don't seem to understand that the problem isn't feminism. Tradwives are very anti-feminist. The problem is capitalism. And when Jen said that, I was like, yes, thank you for saying that. Thank you. That's exactly right. It's a breath of fresh air to hear Jen saying that what my lived experience of more than 2 decades as a homemaker has taught me, it's capitalism and the unsustainable nature of corporate welfare in America that makes us unable to be homemakers, that makes it unaffordable for folks who want to stay at home to raise their children or to engage in unpaid compensation when it comes to homemaking to be able to do so. We are a fading vocation because of capitalism, not because of feminism. And I think that's a really key pivotal thing that tradwives miss. They're really angry, like feminists are making it really hard to be a homemaker. Nah, bro, it's capitalism. Most people cannot afford to have someone who is a dedicated homemaker who doesn't bring home a paycheck, because our culture has no value, no way to appreciate and compensate folks who don't do work that is tied to a paycheck, that don't do work that is tied to a business, that aren't a cog in the machine, that provide really necessary labor, but we don't get a paycheck for it. There's no way to really value that in our society because of capitalism. I would argue that permaculture has a lot of value for that kind of labor and that kind of skill set. So I hope that clears things up a little bit. You can be a deeply religious person and find value in my videos here. And I hope that you would still feel comfortable and safe enjoying my content. I don't disagree with folks having their own religious, spiritual journey. I don't disagree that we can be homemakers even if we have deeply different worldviews. We don't have to agree on everything. For those of you that aren't homemakers, perhaps rightly so, you may have felt that homemaking is something that subjugates women. totally can understand why you might think that way, but I really encourage you not to equate all homemakers with tradwives, and understand that a lot of homemakers, a lot of those of us who are Shannon Hayes iteration of radical homemakers, do not hold tradwife beliefs. There are plenty of us who are pretty radically anti-capitalist, leftist, feminists, hippies, you name it, totally antithetical to tradwives. Lots of us who are queer, who are allies, who are interested in mutual aid and totally radically remaking society, that are homemakers. It's just that the work that we do and the work that tradwives do are not compensated with a paycheck. I think the similarities kind of end there. My hope is that we would make homemaking accessible to anyone who wants to do it. The undervalued labor of homemakers is something our society needs, right? It's necessary. It's just that tradwives miss the mark as to the root causes of why we are devalued as a vocation and why it's becoming harder and harder to be a homemaker. And they also miss the mark when it comes to inclusivity and openness, and they can lead to the alt-right pipeline very quickly. And, for me, part of being a homemaker is being very liberated from the corporate way that our society works, and being very liberated from those kinds of expectations. And I think that part of that liberation is accepting that the way people want to live their lives is the way that they should be allowed to live their lives. People should love who they want to be able to love. They should have relationships with the folks that they want to value and hold dear and have a household with. And that homemakers should be folks who help support the work of a household. And for me, I think that if you stumbled on this channel and you're a tradwife and you think that I'm some horrible pinko or whatever ugly things have been said, then I would just encourage you to say, like, why is it that Angela sees value in the same kind of work I see, but she comes to such really different conclusions at the end of what it looks like to be a homemaker, right? Start with the same premise that homemakers are valuable and necessary, and the work that we do is really important and underappreciated. But we diverge from there, like, very sharply. And so I would say, like, how is it that y'all went this way and I went this way? And maybe there's some room there for conversation. So if you have thoughts and comments or other insight down below, if you're a homemaker, I would love to hear what drew you to homemaking, whether you have changed as a person because of you are a homemaker, or whether if you have changed for other reasons, be it deconstructing from some past, how that has changed your homemaking. I'd love to hear about that. I will be back really soon with a regular permaculture video. If you'd like to support the work of this channel, please check out the ways down below, but also please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and also check out my whole playlist of all my old Hausfrau Friday videos. Thanks.